Jeremiah said, I want you to take about 10 minutes and just make some closing comments after the service. I said, what do you want me to talk about? And he said, just say whatever God lays on your heart. You sure you want me to do this? All right. I'm going to read from Colossians. Paul says, he, that is Christ, is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created, in heaven and on earth. All things were created by him and for him. So those verses talk about the supremacy of Christ, right? It's fundamental to what we believe, that Christ is supreme over everything on this earth. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. So the purpose of Reclamation Church is to make disciples, right? We've been kind of talking about how we intend to do that in the year ahead. So it's good for us to know our purpose, to make disciples, but it's also good for us to know why we do that, right? So I want us to talk about our why. Why do we make disciples? We say here at Reclamation Church, we make disciples for the good of the city and the glory of God. Jeremiah said it earlier, right? That's our why, right? We make disciples for the good of the city and the glory of God. I think most of us get that we make disciples for the glory of God, right? Makes sense. That's why we exist. We as individuals exist for the glory of God. So we make disciples for the glory of God. I think we get that. But the question is, what do we mean when we say we make disciples for the good of the city? What does that mean? How is making disciples good for the city? What's that mean? What do we mean when we say that? So when we say we make disciples for the good of the city, we don't just mean the city. We don't just mean Pittsburgh, right? We certainly include Pittsburgh, but when we say we make disciples for the good of the city, we use the word city in the greater context of society, people, right? We make disciples for the good of the city. We make disciples for the good of people. We make disciples for the good of society, our country. That's what we mean. So the question is, why is making disciples good for the city? Why is making disciples good for society? A couple things probably pop into your head, at least I hope some things maybe pop into your head about why making disciples might be good for our society. But I want to talk about that because this is why I believe, this is what I think we mean when we say we make disciples for the good of the city, for the good of our society. It's because until people in this city, until people in our society and in our country recognize the supremacy of Christ over all things in this earth, and until people understand that Christ is supreme, Christ is the one who is supreme in this earth, and man is not, and until people in our society recognize the supremacy of Christ over their own individual lives, there are no answers for all the issues we face in this country today. None. That's what we mean when we say we make disciples for the good of the city, for the good of society. And I want to talk about how that applies to a few of some pretty big issues we face in this society today. By the way, some of what I'm going to say comes from a sermon. It's titled The Supremacy of Christ in Truth by a guy named Vodi Bakum. And if you don't know Vodi Bakum, go look him up on YouTube. He's an amazing, amazing preacher. So here's the first issue. Truth. Can we talk about truth a little bit? Like, does anybody notice a lack of truth in our society at all, or is it just me? Yeah? And for followers of Christ, the question of truth is simple, right? It's a simple concept. We believe truth is absolute because it's based on an absolute God. God is unchangeable and does not change, and truth does not change because it's based on an unchangeable God. Truth to us is absolute. Christ is the standard. It's an easy concept. But the concept of truth in this humanistic society that we live is anything but simple. It's kind of hard to grasp, honestly, Because truth in our society is relevant, right? Truth in our society is subjective. This is what God laid on my heart, right? And it seems to me that in particular, truth in this society today is subjective to whatever I needed to be to meet my particular needs at the time. Truth in our society is negotiable, right? Truth for this group is different than truth for that group. There are no absolutes in this society. When you talk about absolute truth, people kind of look at you like you're weird. What are you talking about? Doesn't even make sense, right? And I don't know about you, but I'm just a little bit tired, honestly, of being lied to. I'm just a little bit tired of people that are entrusted with the well-being of the people they are to serve and the people they govern, twisting the truth and manipulating it for their own purposes. I'm really tired of it. But I feel like I'm lied to every day. Do you? I just want somebody, anybody, somebody, just stand up once and just say the truth. Just one time. But until this society recognizes the supremacy of Christ in truth, that all truth, right, is that Christ is the basis of all truth, there's not going to be any truth in this society. Where there is no truth, there is no Jesus. And where there is no Jesus, there is no truth, right? That's what we mean when we say we make disciples for the good of the city. We need some truth. There's a few of these. Might be a little bit more than 8 minutes, sorry. Can we talk about the value of human life for a minute? Because I don't know, but I don't see a lot of value being placed on a human life in our society these days. You know, for followers of Christ, answers to questions about the nature of man and why I exist and where I get my value from, those questions are easy to answer. I read the verses. They say all things were created by Christ, by him and for him, right? We are the special creations of Christ, created by him and for his glory. See, for us, the question of who I am starts with who he is, right? He is the creator. I am his special creation, made specifically for his purposes. That's where I get my value. This humanistic society we live in, there's no such concept. There's no such concept. Seems like people are viewed as nothing more than some random evolutionary process. It's like we're glorified apes that walk around, take up space, and have no intrinsic value whatsoever. And it seems to me like people in this society are viewed as things to be manipulated and used for our own purposes, whatever they might be. No value placed on human life in our society. And again, I'm a little bit tired of people who are entrusted with the well-being of the people that they serve and the people they govern, viewing you and me and everybody else as pieces to be manipulated and controlled for their own purposes. I'm a little tired of it. Even worse, I'm really tired of them viewing an unborn child as something that's just an inconvenience that's easy to remove. There's no value in human life here. But this is the point. Until people in our society, right, understand the supremacy of Christ, until they understand and yield to the supremacy of Christ over the value of human life, until we realize that the value of human life comes from the very fact that we are his special creations, until we understand that, we'll never know who we are. If you don't know that you are a special creation of Jesus Christ, you'll never know who you are, and you'll never understand the value of human life. That's why. Where there is no value placed on human life, there is no Jesus, and where there is no Jesus, there is no value placed on human life. That's why we say we make disciples for the good of the city. This idea of the value of human life is pretty closely, and in fact, very closely related to racism issues that we see in this country and in our world. Because outside of recognizing the supremacy of Christ over our lives, and outside of recognizing the supremacy of Christ over the value of human life, outside of understanding that the value of human life comes in the fact that we are all the valued creation of Christ himself for his glory and for his purpose. Without understanding that, A, we'll never understand who we are, and B, we'll never understand somebody else who looks different than us. It's impossible. Jesus was the king of racial reconciliation, right? You can't be a follower of Christ and embrace any form of racism. It can't happen. Where there is racism, there is no Jesus, right? And where there is no Jesus, there will be some form of racism, because without Jesus, we can't understand the true value of a life, regardless of what that life looks like in its bodily form. That's what we mean when we say we make disciples for the good of the city. This is the last one. Purpose of life. What's our purpose of life? Because I don't know about you, but I don't see a lot of people living a very purposeful life or living with an identified purpose to their life. As Christians, we understand the purpose of our life, right? The verses I just read. All things are created by him and for him. That's our purpose, to glorify him, right? But again, in this culture that we live in, there is no purpose that transcends anything other than get while you can while you're here. Outside of Christ, there is no other purpose. Get what you can while you're here. We live in one of the most materialistically minded societies in the world. Dale Buckwalter, the guy I mentioned, he's a pretty funny guy. He says the only purpose in our life is to get what you can what you get, sit on the can. That's it. Right? That's the funny part. And then he goes on to say the not so funny part. And that is that if I have no real reason for my existence other than to get what I can, and if I see no purpose for your life other than you getting what you can, then God help you if I'm more powerful than you. Because I will use my power to fulfill the only purpose I have in my life, even if it means I take what I want from you. Does that sound like this society? Where there is no purpose in life, there is no Jesus. And where there is no Jesus, there is no purpose in life. That, again, is what we mean when we say we make disciples for the good of the city. Purpose of Reclamation Church is to make disciples, right? The why behind it is that we make disciples for the good of the city and the glory of God. We make disciples for the glory of God. That's our primary reason, always will be, right? But we also make disciples because until the people in our city and in our society recognize the supremacy of Christ over all of this earth, and until they recognize the supremacy of Christ over their own individual lives, there are no answers to these issues that we face today. None. So let's go make some disciples for the good of the city and the glory of Christ.